The Atelier Mirror Part 1. The static velvet Marc Dubois looked at the runway collection and saw absolutely nothing. To the fashion world of Paris, he was a volatile, untouchable deity, the creative director of Maison Laurent, a historic fashion house in Le Marais. But inside the high-tech, white-walled atelier, Marc was suffocating. The relentless, crushing pressure of Paris Fashion Week was only 7 days away, and his mind was a desert. The fabrics that used to speak to him felt like dead weight. The sketchbooks in his hands were terrifyingly blank. The industry had digitized his passion, turning his art into a high-speed engine of content and engagement metrics. He was completely, utterly burned out. Then he crossed paths with Aveline Vane. Aveline lived in a world dictated by the slow, unhurried breath of the seasons. She was a botanical illustrator who spent her days in a sun-bleached, quiet stone cottage on the historic outskirts of Versailles. She didn't use digital tablets or algorithmic design software. Her tools were ancient and tactile, heavy, cold-pressed cotton paper, charcoal sticks, and deep Prussian blue inks mixed by hand. She had been commissioned by the museum hosting Maison Laurent's retrospective launch party to document the rare, dying flora embroidered into the house's 19th century archival gowns. As the elite of Paris drank champagne under the glittering chandeliers of the gallery, Marc escaped into the shadows of the archival wing. He found Aveline sitting on a low stool before a glass display case, completely oblivious to the high society noise outside. She was wearing a simple, dark velvet jacket, her fingers stained with charcoal, her eyes intensely focused as she mapped the delicate vein structure of a stylized iris onto her sketchpad. Marc stopped in the shadows. For the first time in 18 months, his chest tightened not with anxiety, but with awe. The rhythmic, scratching sound of her charcoal against the rough paper felt like water hitting a parched soil. "You are drawing it wrong," Marc said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that carried the classic, sharp edge of a Parisian critic. Aveline didn't look up from her page. She blew softly across the paper, clearing away a layer of charcoal dust. "I am drawing its soul, Monsieur Dubois. Your archives only captured its symmetry. Symmetry is a machine's trick. Nature prefers the beautiful flaw." Part 2. The lock and the shadowed clock struck midnight, and the launch party faded into a distant echo. The gallery guests had departed through the main pavilion, leaving the historic archival wing in absolute stillness. Aveline began packing her heavy iron inkwells into her leather case, while Marc stood by the towering arched window, watching the rain wash over the cobblestones of Le Marais. Suddenly, a sharp, electronic chime resonated through the vaulted ceiling. The soft, ambient gallery lights cut out, plunged into a deep, velvety dark. High-security steel shutters slid over the windows with a heavy, automated thud. Maison Laurent's new, state-of-the-art biometric security system had executed its nightly lockdown loop ahead of schedule. Marc stepped toward the master exit terminal, pressing his palm against the glass scanner. The device pulsed with a cold, sapphire light, then flashed crimson. "System lockdown active. Biometric recognition out of sync. Manual rewrite requires 2-stage verification. Time to secure reboot. 06 hours. We are locked in," Marc said, turning back toward the gallery room. The room was now illuminated only by the faint, golden amber safety strips running along the base of the limestone columns. Aveline let out a soft, amused sigh that rippled through the quiet space. The great dictator of fashion, imprisoned by his own modern cage. "There is a poetic justice in that, don't you think?" "It is a catastrophe," Marc muttered, his hand raking through his hair. "I have a global board meeting at dawn. My legacy is on the line, and I have nothing to show them." "Then stop looking at what you don't have," Aveline said softly. She walked toward the center of the room, where a single spotlight from an emergency generator cast a warm, golden pool of light onto a long, marble-cutting table. "Sit down, Marc. The machines are asleep. You should try it too." Part 3. The tactile and cold marble table became their sanctuary. The air in the gallery grew heavy and warm, smelling of old paper, historic silk, and the rich, organic musk of her inkwells. The high-speed noise of the fashion industry had been completely locked out by the steel shutters Aveline unrolled a massive sheet of raw, ivory watercolor paper across the dark marble. She looked at Mark, noting the deep shadows of exhaustion beneath his eyes, the rigid, tense set of his broad shoulders. He was a man drowning in his own perfectionism. "Show me where the block is," she whispered, stepping close to him. The proximity was electric. She smelled of the rain outside and the sweet, resinous scent of raw ink. Mark reached out, his long fingers picking up a heavy stick of pure, unrefined charcoal. His hand shook slightly. He touched the tip to the paper, but his mind froze again. "It is gone," he said, his voice raw with a sudden, devastating vulnerability. "The inspiration." I look at the canvas, and I see only the judgment of the critics. I see numbers. Aveline didn't speak. Instead, she did something completely unscripted. She reached out and gently took his wrist. Her hand was warm, soft, and grounded. She guided his hand away from the paper, pulling his arm down until the charcoal stick was hovering just above the pale skin of her own bare forearm, exposed by her rolled-up sleeve. "Draw on me," Aveline murmured, her eyes locking onto his with an intense, unwavering trust. No critics, no spreadsheets, just texture, shadow, and skin. Feel the resistance of the surface, Mark. Remember what it feels like to create without wanting to possess. Mark's breath hitched. In the dim gold light, the contrast between his dark, starched designer cuff and her luminous, bare skin looked like a classic Caravaggio painting. He lowered the charcoal. The first stroke was tentative, a feather-light brush of black dust against her inner wrist. Aveline's pulse fluttered rapidly beneath his fingers, an exquisite, living rhythm that shattered his mental paralysis. Mark let out a long, ragged breath. He began to draw. He traced the elegant, organic contours of her arm, moving upward toward her shoulder. He drew the sweeping vines of the Versailles flora, not with the sterile precision of a computer, but with a wild, passionate abandon. The charcoal crumbled in his grip, dusting both of their skins in silver-black shadows. The intimacy shifted from artistic to deeply, viscerally sensual. The professional walls they had both built collapsed completely. Mark dropped the charcoal, his hand sliding up her neck to cradle her jaw, his thumb smoothing over her cheekbone, leaving a faint trace of ash behind. Aveline looked up, her breathing quick and shallow, her fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt. "Mark, let me find the design," he whispered against her lips. When he kissed her, it was a slow, luxurious surrender. It tasted of absolute survival and profound relief. He pulled her flesh against his chest, his large hands unbuttoning the starched layers of his jacket, needing to feel the unfiltered warmth of her skin against his. Aveline let out a soft, breathless sigh into his mouth, her arms wrapping around his neck as they moved together in the golden shadow of the empty museum. Every touch was an act of emotional healing, a tactile reawakening that burned away his cynicism and filled the empty spaces of his mind with a vibrant, white-hot inspiration. Part 4. The Versailles Horizon. Not exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. The gallery's security system executed its automated reboot. With a heavy, echoing click, the steel shutters slid upward, allowing the first pale, crisp indigo light of a Parisian dawn to flood across the limestone floor. Mark and Aveline stood side by side before the marble table. The massive sheet of ivory paper was no longer blank. It was covered in a breathtaking, chaotic explosion of charcoal silhouettes, sweeping botanical vines, and bold, poetic drapes that captured the raw movement of a woman's body in the dark. It was a masterclass in avant-garde design. Mark looked at the canvas, then looked down at Aveline. His eyes were clear, bright, and completely alive. He reached down and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, completely unbothered by the charcoal stains that marked them both. "It is the new collection," Mark said, his voice thick with a quiet, unshakable certainty. "The entire Paris showcase will be built on this texture. Raw silk, hand-dyed ink, and your botanical illustrations woven into the structures." Aveline smiled, leaning her head gently against his shoulder as the golden hour sunlight began to warm the room. "And what will the critics say about the beautiful flaws, Monsieur Dubois?" Mark pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head, his heart entirely secure for the first time in his life. They will say that Maison Laurent has finally remembered how to breathe.